The scream cut through the morning like a knife through butter. Mr. Alexander Stone was drinking his coffee in the big dining room when he heard it. The sound made his hands freeze. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. It wasn't just any scream. It was the kind of scream that meant someone was in terrible pain. Alexander was a billionaire. He owned a mansion with 30 rooms, marble floors that shine like mirrors and golden door handles. He had more money than he could count. But right now, none of that mattered. Something was very, very wrong in his house. He jumped up from his chair. His expensive suit jacket flew open as he ran. His shoes clicked fast against the marble floor. The scream came again. It was coming from the kitchen area where the servants worked. "Please, please stop," a small voice cried. Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. He ran faster. When he burst through the kitchen door, what he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. There was Miss Sarah, the nanny he had hired 6 months ago. She was holding a hot-pressing iron in her hand. Steam was rising from it. And there on the floor was a small boy. He was maybe 7 years old. His arm was red and blistered. Tears poured down his face like rivers. "What is happening here?" Alexander's voice came out like thunder. Miss Sarah dropped the iron. It clattered on the floor. Her face went white as a sheet. The boy on the floor curled up into a ball, shaking and sobbing. "Mr. Stone, I can explain," Miss Sarah stammered. But Alexander wasn't listening to her. He rushed to the little boy. He knelt down on the expensive floor, not caring that his suit pants would get dirty. Up close, he could see the burn mark on the boy's small arm. It looked like the shape of the iron. The skin was angry and red. Some parts were already starting to blister. "It's okay, son. It's okay now," Alexander said softly. His hands were gentle as he looked at the burn. The boy flinched away, afraid. That's when Alexander recognized him. This was Tommy. He was the son of Maria, one of the maids who cleaned the mansion. Alexander had seen the boy before, playing quietly in the servants' quarters, but he had never really paid attention to him. After all, Alexander was always busy with his business deals and important meetings. Now, looking at Tommy's tear-stained face, Alexander felt something break inside his chest. "Who did this to you?" Alexander asked, even though he already knew the answer. Tommy's lips trembled. He looked at Miss Sarah, and then at the floor. He didn't say anything. He was too scared. Alexander stood up slowly. He turned to face Miss Sarah. The nanny was backing away toward the wall. Her hands were shaking. "Mr. Stone, the boy, he broke your expensive vase. The one in the hallway. I was just trying to teach him to be more careful. I didn't mean to—" "You burned a child with a hot iron," Alexander interrupted. His voice was quiet now, but it was a kind of quiet that felt dangerous. "You hurt a 7-year-old boy." Other servants had gathered at the doorway. They stood there, watching with wide eyes. Alexander saw Maria, Tommy's mother, pushing through the crowd. When she saw her son on the floor, she let out a cry and ran to him. "Tommy, my baby." She scooped him up carefully, trying not to touch his burned arm. Tommy buried his face in his mother's shoulder and cried harder. Alexander looked around at all the servants. They all looked scared. Not just scared of what had happened. They looked scared of him, like they expected him to explode with anger, like they expected him to be cruel. And that's when Alexander realized something terrible. His house was full of fear. These people who worked for him, they were afraid all the time. They were afraid to make mistakes, afraid to speak up, afraid to tell him when something was wrong. How long had this been going on? How long had Tommy been hurt and scared in his own house? "Everyone listen to me," Alexander said. His voice was firm but calm. "I want someone to call my personal doctor right now. Tell him it's an emergency. I want someone else to bring my car around front. We're taking Tommy to the hospital immediately." The servants scattered to follow his orders. Alexander turned back to Miss Sarah. She was crying now, mascara running down her face. "Please, Mr. Stone, I need this job. I'll lose everything. My apartment, "We'll talk later," Alexander said. "Right now, this child needs help." He walked over to Maria. The maid was rocking Tommy gently, whispering to him in Spanish. Her face was wet with tears. "Maria, come with me. We're taking Tommy to get the best care possible," Alexander said. Maria looked up at him with surprise in her eyes. "But, sir, I can't afford." "I'm paying for everything," Alexander said firmly. "Your son was hurt in my house, under my roof. That makes it my responsibility." He reached out and very gently touched Tommy's shoulder. The boy looked at him with big, scared eyes. "Tommy, I promise you something right now," Alexander said, looking straight into the boy's eyes. "Nobody will ever hurt you in this house again. Do you understand? Never again." Tommy didn't say anything, but something small flickered in his eyes. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just confusion. Alexander couldn't tell. As they walked out of the kitchen, Alexander felt his whole world shifting. This morning, he had woken up as a billionaire who cared about stock prices and business deals. Now, he was walking out as a man who had seen something he couldn't ignore. The marble floors that he was so proud of suddenly felt cold. The golden decorations looked empty. What good was all his money if children were being hurt in his own home? Alexander carried Tommy's small shoes in his hand as they headed to the car. They were worn and old, with holes in the bottom. He had never noticed before how poor Maria and her son were. They lived in his mansion, but they had nothing. As the car pulled away from the mansion, Alexander looked back at the huge building. It looked like a palace, but inside it had been hiding something dark. He didn't know it yet, but this morning, this terrible, painful morning, was about to change everything. Not just for Tommy, not just for Maria, but for Alexander himself. Sometimes, God puts moments in our lives that wake us up, moments that show us who we really are, moments that ask us a question. Will you choose to be different? Alexander Stone was about to answer that question, and his answer would surprise everyone, including himself. The hospital smelled like clean sheets and medicine. Alexander sat in the waiting room with Maria while doctors worked on Tommy's arm. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She twisted a tissue over and over in her fingers. "I should have known," Maria whispered. "I should have protected him better." Alexander looked at this woman who cleaned his floors every day. He had never really talked to her before. Not really. He would say, "Good morning," sometimes, but that was it. Now he was seeing her for the first time, a mother whose heart was breaking. "How long has this been happening?" Alexander asked gently. Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Miss Sarah, she's been mean to Tommy for 2 months. She would pinch him when no one was looking. She would make him stand in the corner for hours. She said he was too noisy, too messy, that children like him didn't belong in a fancy house like yours." Alexander felt anger rising in his chest again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just anger at Miss Sarah. It was anger at himself. How had he not noticed? He lived in that house. He walked those halls. How had he been so blind? "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Maria looked down at her twisted tissue. "Mr. Stone, people like me, we don't complain. If we complain, we lose our jobs. And if I lose my job, where would Tommy and I go? We have no money, no other family. Your mansion, even with Miss Sarah being mean, it was better than living on the streets." Those words hit Alexander like a punch to the stomach. Maria had let her son get hurt because she was too afraid to lose her job. And why was she afraid? Because Alexander had created a house where servants were too scared to speak up. Before he could say anything, the doctor came out. "The boy will be fine," the doctor said with a kind smile. "The burn is serious, but we've treated it. He'll need to keep it bandaged and come back for checkups. No infection so far, which is good." "Thank God." Maria breathed out. "Can we see him?" Alexander asked. The doctor nodded and led them to a small room. Tommy was lying on a hospital bed. His arm was wrapped in white bandages. He looked so tiny in that big bed. When he saw his mother, his face crumpled. "Mama," he said in a small voice. Maria rushed to his side and hugged him carefully. "My brave boy, my sweet, brave boy." Alexander stood at the door, watching. He felt like an outsider. This wasn't his family. These weren't his people. But watching Tommy cry in his mother's arms, Something inside Alexander's heart began to crack open. He thought about his own childhood. His father had been cold and distant. Alexander had grown up in big houses like this one, but he had never felt truly loved. His father taught him that money was everything, that power was everything, that people who had less money were less important. Looking at Tommy now, Alexander realized his father had been wrong about everything. "Tommy," Alexander said, stepping closer to the bed, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Tommy looked at him with those big, scared eyes again. He nodded slowly. Alexander pulled a chair close and sat down. He wanted to be at Tommy's level, not standing above him like some powerful giant. "I need to tell you something important," Alexander said. "What Miss Sarah did to you was very, very wrong. Grown-ups should never hurt children. Ever. Not for any reason." Tommy's bottom lip trembled. "But I broke your vase. It was expensive. Miss Sarah said it cost more money than my mama makes in a whole year." Alexander's heart squeezed tight. "Tommy, listen to me. That vase was just a thing. Just glass and paint. You are a person. A human being. You are worth more than 1,000,000 vases. Do you understand?" Tommy stared at him. He didn't look like he believed it. "I'm going back to mansion now," Alexander continued, "and I need to make a decision about Miss Sarah. Some people think I should call the police and have her arrested. Some people think I should fire her and make sure she never works again." Maria sucked in a breath. She was clearly waiting to hear what punishment would come. "But I've been thinking," Alexander said slowly. "I've been thinking about what Jesus taught, about mercy, about forgiveness, about second chances." He paused, gathering his thoughts. This wasn't easy. Every part of him wanted revenge, wanted justice, wanted Miss Sarah to suffer the way Tommy had suffered. "I'm not going to call the police," Alexander said finally, "but I am going to do something else." Maria's eyes went wide. "Sir, Miss Sarah's going to leave my house, but I'm going to pay for her to go to counseling, to talk to someone who can help her understand why hurting children is wrong. I'm going to give her a chance to become better, to heal whatever broke inside her that made her think this was okay." Alexander turned back to Tommy. "And you, young man, you and your mama are not going to live in the servants' quarters anymore. I have 30 rooms in that mansion. Most of them are empty. You're going to have your own bedroom, with your own toys, your own books, whatever you want." Tommy's mouth fell open. My own room?" "Your own room," Alexander confirmed. "And your mama is not going to be a maid anymore. She's going to be the house manager. That means she makes sure the house runs smoothly, but she doesn't have to scrub floors anymore. She'll have a real salary, enough money to take care of you properly." Maria started crying again, but these were different tears. "Mr. Stone, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this for us?" Alexander stood up. He felt taller somehow, stronger, not because of his money or his power, but because, for the first time in his life, he was doing something truly good. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I've been living wrong for too long. My house has been cold and scary. I want it to be warm and safe, starting today." Over the next few days, everything changed. Alexander hired movers to set up Tommy's new room. He bought a bed shaped like a race car, shelves full of books, a toy box that overflowed with trains and blocks and stuffed animals. He called a meeting with all the servants. He stood in front of them and said something he had never said before. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not paying attention. I'm sorry for letting fear rule this house. From now on, if anyone has a problem, you come to me directly. No more being afraid." The servants looked at each other in shock. Billionaires didn't apologize. Billionaires didn't admit mistakes. But Alexander was learning something powerful. True strength isn't about power over others. True strength is about protecting others, about choosing mercy when you could choose revenge. Miss Sarah came to him before she left. Her bags were packed. Her eyes were red from crying. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "None of us deserve kindness," Alexander said. "But we all need it. Go get help. Become better. And maybe one day you'll pass on the mercy I'm giving you to someone else who needs it." The day Tommy came home from the hospital, something magical happened. Alexander was in the hallway when Tommy saw his new room for the first time. The boy stood in the doorway, staring at the race car bed, the toys, the bright blue walls. "Is this really mine?" Tommy asked in wonder. "Really yours," Alexander confirmed. And then Tommy did something that changed everything. He turned around and hugged Alexander's leg tight. "Thank you," Tommy whispered. "Thank you for saving me." Alexander's eyes got wet. He knelt down and hugged Tommy back, carefully so he wouldn't hurt the bandaged arm. In that moment, Alexander Stone stopped being just a billionaire. He started becoming something much more important. He started becoming a father. 3 months passed like pages turning in a beautiful book. The mansion that once felt like a cold museum now felt like a home. You could hear laughter in the hallways. Tommy's laughter, bright and clear as morning bells. Sometimes Alexander would stop his important business calls just to listen to it. Tommy's arm healed. The bandages came off, leaving a scar that would always be there. But Tommy didn't hide it. "It reminds me of when my life got better," he told Alexander one day. That simple sentence made Alexander's heart feel full. Every morning now, Alexander did something he had never done before. Instead of rushing to his office, he had breakfast with Tommy and Maria. They sat together at the big dining table, the same table where Alexander used to eat alone, reading the newspaper and ignoring the world around him. "Mr. Stone, did you know that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago?" Tommy would say, his eyes shining with excitement. He was reading all the books Alexander had bought him. "Tell me everything about them," Alexander would answer, putting down his coffee. And Tommy would talk and talk, his hands waving in the air as he described T-Rexes and Triceratops. Maria would watch them with tears in her eyes. Happy tears. Grateful tears. She couldn't believe how much had changed. But the most beautiful change was happening in Alexander's heart. He started leaving work early to help Tommy with homework. He taught Tommy how to ride a bike in the mansion's huge garden. When Tommy fell and scraped his knee, Alexander cleaned the cut and put on a bandage, just like a real father would. "Does it hurt a lot?" Alexander asked, worried. "A little," Tommy said bravely, "but not as much as before. Nothing hurts as much as before." Those words struck Alexander deep. He realized that Tommy wasn't just talking about his knee. He was talking about his life, about how everything had changed when someone finally chose to protect him instead of hurt him. One evening, Alexander got a letter. It was from Miss Sarah, the nanny. His hands shook a little as he opened it. "Dear Mr. Stone," it read, "I have been going to counseling like you asked. I'm learning about my anger, about the hurt in my own heart that made me hurt others. I was beaten as a child, and I grew up thinking that's how you teach children. I was wrong. So wrong. I'm working every day to be better. I volunteer now at a children's shelter, helping kids who have been hurt like I was hurt. I will never be able to take back what I did to Tommy, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure other children are protected. Thank you for giving me a chance to change. Your mercy saved my life." Alexander folded the letter carefully. Mercy was a strange thing. It didn't erase the bad things that happened, but it could create something new, something good, like planting a flower in a place where there used to be only dirt. He showed the letter to Maria. She read it slowly, her finger tracing the words. "Do you forgive her?" Alexander asked. Maria was quiet for a long time. "I'm trying," she finally said. "Forgiveness is hard, but I see what your mercy did. It didn't just change her. It changed all of us. It changed this whole house." She was right. The servants no longer walked on tiptoes, afraid to make noise. They smiled more. They talked more. The mansion felt alive now, filled with voices and warmth. Alexander started doing more, too. He hired a teacher to come to the mansion 3 times a week to give Tommy extra lessons. He wanted to make sure Tommy got the best education possible. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Tommy asked one day. They were sitting in the garden, watching butterflies dance around the flowers. Alexander thought carefully about his answer. "Because every child deserves to be loved and protected," he said. And because you become very special to me, Tommy. Tommy was quiet, watching a yellow butterfly land on a rose. Then he said something so soft Alexander almost didn't hear it. I never had a dad before. Alexander's throat felt tight. I know, buddy. My mama says my real dad left before I was born. He didn't want us. His loss, Alexander said firmly. He missed out on knowing the bravest, smartest, most wonderful boy in the world. Tommy looked up at him with those big eyes. Do you think maybe you could be like my dad? Alexander felt his eyes getting wet again. This kept happening now. Before Tommy, Alexander never cried. He thought crying was weakness. Now he understood that tears could be proof of love. Tommy, I would be honored to be like your dad, Alexander said, his voice shaky. Tommy smiled, that huge, bright smile that could light up the darkest room. Then he said the word that changed everything. Okay, Papa. Papa. Alexander pulled Tommy into a hug. He held this little boy who had suffered so much, who had been burned and hurt and scared. And he made a silent promise. I will protect you for the rest of my life. From that day on, Tommy called Alexander Papa. And Alexander called Tommy son. The news about what happened in the mansion eventually spread to the city. Reporters wanted to write stories about it. Billionaire shows mercy to abusive nanny, the headlines read. Wealthy man adopts maid son. But Alexander didn't do interviews for attention. He simply said, I'm just doing what anyone with a heart should do. I'm choosing love over revenge. I'm choosing to heal instead of hurt. His words inspired others. Other wealthy people started treating their servants better. Other families started practicing mercy instead of punishment. It was like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples went out and out and out, touching people Alexander would never even meet. 1 year after that terrible morning, Alexander threw a party. Not a fancy business party, with boring adults in suits. No, this was a birthday party for Tommy, who was turning 8 years old. The garden was decorated with balloons and streamers. There was a huge cake shaped like a dinosaur. All the servants' children were invited. There was music and games and so much laughter. Alexander watched Tommy run around with the other kids, completely happy and free. The scar on his arm was visible, but Tommy wasn't ashamed of it anymore. It was part of the story, part of the journey from darkness to light. Maria came and stood beside Alexander. You gave us everything, she said softly. A home, a future, hope. Alexander shook his head. No, Maria, you and Tommy gave me everything. You taught me what really matters. You taught me that love is stronger than money. That mercy is more powerful than revenge. That family is about blood. It's about choice. As the sun set over the mansion, painting the sky in colors of orange and pink, Tommy ran up to Alexander. Papa, come play with us, he shouted, pulling on Alexander's hand. And Alexander, the billionaire who used to care only about business deals and stock prices, let himself be pulled into a game of tag with a bunch of giggling children. The mansion was no longer just a building made of marble and gold. It was a home made of love and second chances. It was a place where a hurt child had found safety, where a scared mother had found dignity, where a broken nanny had found redemption, and where a lonely billionaire had found a family he never knew he needed. That night, after Tommy had fallen asleep in his race car bed, Alexander stood in the doorway and watched him breathe. This little boy had changed everything, had turned a palace of pride into a sanctuary of grace. Alexander whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for teaching me how to love." And somewhere in his dreams, Tommy smiled. This story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in money. It's measured in mercy, kindness, and love. When we choose to protect the vulnerable instead of punishing the broken, we create miracles. We heal not just others, but ourselves. Did this story touch your heart? Like this story if you believe in the power of second chances. Share it with someone who needs to hear that mercy is stronger than revenge. And subscribe to hear more stories that remind us what it means to be truly human. To choose love even when hate seems easier. To forgive even when anger feels justified. And to believe that broken things can become beautiful again. Because in the end, the richest person isn't the one with the most money. It's the one with the most love to give. Like, share, subscribe.